Okay, calling the Committee on Ways and Means and Committee on Finance informational briefing to order. So today we'll hear from Dr. Tian, Dr. Bonham on our economic overview, and we'll begin with Dr. Tian. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon and Happy New Year, chairs
Happy
and
New Year.
Members of the committees. Let me start with my shared screen. I apologize for not being able to come to the room because I'm still recovering from cold I caught about 2 weeks ago. Do you see my slide?
Yes.
Okay, let me start with our projection. This is the Tibetan Projection. We released at the end of November. Exact date is November 30th. So there are a few numbers we want to pay attention. The visitor arrivals, our forecast is 6.8 million for this year and for 2021. And visitor spending is about 12.7 billion. I think for the first 11 months, the data we have is 6 million visitors, 11.3 billion spending. I think we will reach this number pretty closely when the December number became available. And we forecast the inflation rate at 4.1% 2021, 2.9% in 2022. I think year to date for 2021 was at about 3.6%. The first half was 2.6%, the second half was 5%. So our forecast for 2021 was a little bit higher. And for 2022, it might be a little bit low. So there are three numbers we want to pay attention. One is the visitor arrivals. If we look at the arrivals up to 2024, we don't see the visitor arrivals will fully recover by the forecasting period. So it won't be recovered until 2025. Also, when we look at the non-agricultural wage and the salary jobs, it's also not going to be fully recovered by 2025. And we look at the real GDP, which is the economic size of the economy, will not fully recover by the end of this forecasting period. So it will be recovered by 2025. Let me move on. The current data, actually every day we see the data. Other than the COVID cases, I think the economic information has been very encouraging. For the real GDP, we have 9 months and 3 quarters already. The growth rate was 5.6%. It was very high. It was highest actually since 2006. And for the first 3 quarters, the recovery is 94% overall. But the non-tourism, the green line, the recovery is fully recovered as of the 3rd quarter. But the tourism sector, that's including retail sales, transportation, art and recreation, and also accommodation and food services. So the recovery is about 79%. In terms of jobs, the overall recovery is 86%. Jobs is always lagging the economy. Even for the non-tourism sector, the recovery is 93%. And tourism sector is about 78% recovery. So we still have a lot of work need to be done in terms of the employment. And I look at the local data, the data from the tax department. You can see, I show here, there are 4 tax bases. So what I did is I lag the tax base 1 month because the collection for this month is for the activity of last month. So you can see the retail tax base, wholesale tax base, contracting tax base, and the 0.5% the use tax base. They all fully recovered since March. So this is encouraging news because the sales in the States is really good. So that's why our general excise tax increase in terms of the fiscal year up to November. the GE tax increase is 39.8%, and the general fund tax revenue increased by about 27.3%. I think Carl will talk about that. That's his area of expertise. And when we look at the other tax base, the service tax base, by the way, those numbers I adjusted inflation. I deflated by the corresponding price index. For example, service tax base, I adjusted by service CPI, and the rental, I adjusted by the residential rental, hotel rental tax base, I adjusted by room rate. So you can see that service is still falling behind, but it's very close to the rate. So when we look at the 2019, when we look at the service recovery, actually it's 91.3%. When we look at the other rental tax base, this is mainly the residential rental. And we have 43% of our homes, our residents are renting their homes. So that kind of a rent is, the recovery is about 87.3%. But the hotel rental tax base, you can see that the September collection, which is August activity, is fully recovered. So the recovery is fast. Later on, I have a slide to show mainly the tax base for the hotel rental is coming from the US visitors. Let me continue with the labor market conditions. So we can see that Hawaii's unemployment rate, we were the second lowest between 2015 to 2019. And we were actually the lowest the first quarter of 2020. Then we became the third highest in April 2020 because of the beginning of the pandemic. And now we are standing at about the sixth highest. We have a fourth state tied with Hawaii, but at the 6%, this is seasonally adjusted unemployment rate. We were sixth highest in the nation. It's an improvement from the highest to the sixth lowest. And in terms of jobs, this is payroll jobs. I'm showing here is the January to November, 11 months average. We still lost about over 91,000 jobs. The whole recovery, overall recovery is 86.1%. So by county, you can see Honolulu and Hawaii County are doing better than Maui and Kauai. The main reason is Maui and Kauai counties, they are more tourism dependent. You can see that by the hospitality and transportation, those sectors, tourism sectors recovery. So the Maui County and the Kauai County, they are falling behind in terms of job recovery. But actually, in terms of visitor arrivals, Maui County recovery is the highest. And the reason is, I think the industry, they hire fewer people, but produce more volume. So the productivity actually increased in the tourism sector, especially on Maui. So I divided the sectors, the industry by two sectors, tourism and non-tourism. So the top portion is the non-tourism. The recovery at the end of November is 93.4%. This is in terms of payroll job count. But the tourism sector hit the most, is more than, the job decrease is more than 40%. But the recovery is about 21 percentage point. So by the end of November, the recovery is 78.5%. But still the tourism is the sector that's driving the economic growth. So this is initial unemployment claims. And in a typical year, so the average weekly claim is about 1,200. So it's 1,200. And currently the latest data we have is 1,400. So we are still above the average. There was only 1 week that we were 1,208 is close. I was very happy to see that number. But since October 9th, the initial claim has been below 2,000. I think that is a good sign. And the number is not increasing, it's pretty much level. And this is talking about employment. Employment is the body count. Job is the job count. One person holds multiple jobs. They will count once here as a body count, but they will count multiple times in the job count. So this is employment. So you can see the employment number, we have been increasing since the beginning of this year. So now standing by the end of November, we have 608,000. So that recovery represents about 92.3% recovery. So that was the highest since the pandemic. And at the same time, the unemployment, the number of people unemployed, the bottom line shows that we still have 38,450 people are still looking for jobs, but it's not lucky enough. So these people, on a typical year, our unemployment number is to be around 15,000. So this is double the number in the normal year. And this shows the job opening. You can see the latest data is October. I saw the data for the nation came out today, this morning, but the state level data has not been released. The latest is October. So you can see we have a lot of openings in October. So we have about 56,000 openings, but then we hired about 38,000. We still have 18,000 people, positions not filled. So this is actually the highest since the beginning of 2019. So we have a lot of opening, and we also at the same time, we have more people. We have 38,000 people are looking for jobs. So this is not is because of not a good match. Those 38,000 people, they may not match these 18,000 people positions need to be filled. And currently, we do have some labor shortage because we have more openings and we still have more positions need to be filled. So now let's talk about tourism. The data from this TISA passenger count, I scaled them to as January 2021 as 1. So then we can compare with the US and Hawaii. As you can see that Hawaii, the passenger traffic was very heavy during the summer months. So you can see Hawaii is, compared with January, we are at about four times as high as January. And then we were the same when the Delta variant started. We were the same as the US. Then at the holidays, Thanksgiving, and also the New Year, Christmas, Hawaii's visitors is actually increased a lot. So you can see the recently, we have a number for November, as of November, but our count for December, the daily visitors for December was about 24,000 per day. So the arrivals per day. And in November was 20,446. So the December was 4,000, almost 4,000 higher than November on a daily basis. And for the first 3 days, we have data for this year, for 2022. First 3 days, we have 18,000 a day. So it's lower than December. And I think the visitor arrivals in 2022, at least for the first month, it may be slowing down. I have a slide to show that. But the visitor arrivals is mostly coming from the US mainland. I divide the visitors by US visitors. So they are the residents of the US mainland. And this is in terms of residents. And I divided also another part is international visitors. So the US visitor arrivals is actually since May last year, every month is surpassed the same level in 2019. So we have more US visitors than the international visitors, of course. Between May and November, the US visitors was 110.4%, which is 10.4% more than the same period in 2019. But international visitors, we are still lagging, is only 7.6% recovery, which means that the visitors in first 11 months for 2021, they were only 7.6% of the same period 2019 level. So the recovery is actually accelerated starting in March, and July became the peak. And you can see that by expenditure. Actually, July, the visitor arrivals total recovery is 88.4%. And for the expenditure recovery is 93%. Then because of the Delta variant is slowing down since August. Then we look at the visitor recovery by county. You can see that this is by island. You can see Maui Island actually leading the way of recovery. In July, the recovery is almost 92%. And if you look at the November, it's still at 87%. It's because the COVID cases is slowing down. And this compared with the Maui job recovery in the hospitality sector. So you can see that the job recovery is falling behind. That's why I'm saying the productivity increase in the tourism sector, because the visitor arrival is much higher than the job recovery. So the recovery for other counties, I think for the whole state is about, as of November, is 77.4%, and Kauai and Maui leading the way. This is the most recent the schedule, air schedule, the airline schedule. This is in terms of air seat, how many seats. This is the supply side of the tourism. You can see that December is a decrease by 3.6%. And in January will decrease by 8.1%. In February will decrease by 9.7%. This is all in comparison with the same month, 2019. So this is actually the airlines has been already adjusted for their flights. Although we have some good news, increasing flight from Canada and also resuming the flight from Australia. But we still see some decrease in overall. But when you look at the column of Kahului, that's the arrivals to Maui, it will be a double-digit increase as well going into the next 2 months. Real estate has been booming in 2021. So you can see this is the first 11 months, all double-digit for all the islands in terms of sales and as well as the price. Is I think it will continue to increase into the next few months. During the first 3 quarters, we have data from the land court. During the first 9 months of 2021, there were about 19,240. In a typical year in the state, the total home sales is about 20,000 for the full year. But during the first 9 months, it was in 2021 was 19,240 homes sold. So it's a 49.3% increase from the same period in 2020 and a 26.7% increase from the same period in 2019. And in terms of the buyers by residents, compared with 10 years ago, so 2010 and 2021, you can see the change is that there are more local residents purchasing the property than the out-of-state residents, especially for the last 2 counties, Maui and Kauai. In 2010, you can see almost half of the properties were sold to out-of-state. But in 2021, the local purchase is more than 60%, 62.8% for Maui and 64.3% for Kauai. So that is the change. But in terms of price, So you can see still the out-of-state residents, they purchase the high-end homes. This is the average price for these first 9 months from the land court. So in terms of single family, the foreigner purchased about 2.2 million per home, and mainland is 1.6 million. The local residence is about 877. The same pattern for condo homes. And construction will be still the star industry in the next few years. Next year, especially for 2022, we see that in the tax base, contracting tax base, for the 3 years, 2019, 2021, it's pretty much leveled. So the construction industry actually didn't decrease during the pandemic, and it didn't lose jobs during the pandemic. From the building permit, this is private building permit, for the first 11 months of 2021, we increased 26.1% in the total volume. So the increase mostly is in the residential construction. Residential construction increased, the volume of residential construction increased by more than 80%. So this indicating that the construction industry will be still doing better. In terms of the residential unit authorized, for the first 11 months, it was more than 5,000. So it's about 24% increase from 2020, and is the highest level since 2007. In terms of how our businesses are doing, we did the first surveys since the beginning of this pandemic. In July 2020, September, December, we did a survey in March. The last survey was in March 2021. So it all showed that at the beginning of the pandemic, 60% of our businesses were closed, either temporarily or permanently. As of March 2021, so 92% of them were open, either permanently or temporarily, or partially or fully open. There was only 1.8% said that they will be closed permanently. This translates into around 500 businesses will be permanently closed. And in terms of the general excise tax, I showed the tax base. This is general excise tax. I consider this to be the most comprehensive measure of our economic activity. Because when we look at the general fund tax revenue, there are some other technical changes. For example, the TAT now is in the general fund, and also the income tax has been increasing even during the pandemic because of the federal assistance. But the general excise tax is the sales. It has been increasing since June 2021. Every month is higher. This is the general excise tax collection is since June 2021 has been higher every month than the same month in 2019. This is consistent with the Census Bureau's survey on the retail sales. This is the retail sales. You can see starting in the beginning of 2021, we have 3 quarters data so far. You can see every quarter is a double-digit increase. Attention should be paying to the building materials and the garden equipment supplies. It never decreased during the 2020, the pandemic, and 2021. So it's continued, that industry has been continued to increase. So that number is consistent with the construction industry. And this is my last slide. The data just became available yesterday. The bankruptcy filing, Hawaii bankruptcy filing is still decreased in the full year 2021. So the full year total filing is 1,184. That's compared with 2010. The filing was 3,978. So this is about the 22.3% decrease from 2020. So actually 2020 was a decrease by 8.1%. So this bankruptcy filing is reflecting 2 factors. One is the federal government assistance, And secondly is the economic recovery. So that concludes my presentation. I'm not sure if I leave the questions to the end of Carl or answer questions now.
Yeah, so we're going to call a short recess so that we can set up for Dr. Bonham's presentation. Okay, recess. Calling the meeting back to order. Now we'll hear from Dr. Bonham.
Thank you, Senator. Thanks, everyone, for the invitation. It's my pleasure to be here. I'm going to talk about the forecast report that we released in the fourth quarter. So we released this in early December. That means we were finishing it up at the end of November. And, you know, just the big takeaway from all this is that the pandemic continues to drive the forecast, particularly in the near term. And there's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and it's almost all of it's coming from the Omicron variant. Now, when we released our third quarter forecast, it was the Delta variant. So it feels like Groundhog Day or something, right? So we're just repeating ourselves. But you know, now we're dealing with this new variant, and there's still a lot that's unknown. We definitely know that it's more contagious, right? So for every person who gets it, they're going to infect more people. And we're seeing that in the case numbers. We think that it's less virulent. We don't have any solid evidence yet for the nation. We've got data, and most epidemiologists tell you don't pay much attention to what's coming out of South Africa because it's just too different, right? So most of the focus has been really on the data coming out of Northern Europe. And there is evidence of reduced hospitalizations and reduced severe disease. We don't know anything about the long-term effects yet, right? And so that's a good reason to not let Omicron just run wild, because two good reasons. One, we don't know about the long-term effects. We don't yet know whether the surge in cases will overwhelm our hospitals, even if it's less virulent, right? And we're seeing more children being affected, right? And people who are not eligible to be vaccinated. So there is pretty good evidence that the boosters help a lot, right? There's also very good evidence that a 2-dose regimen is not sufficiently effective, right? It doesn't prevent the spread the way it did with Delta. So I'm repeating stuff that you've already heard, but the key thing is that it doesn't make any sense anymore to say 2 shots is fully vaccinated. I don't think, I challenge you to find any medical expert epidemiologist, doctor, who will tell you that a 2-shot regimen is fully vaccinated. But we continue to behave as if that's the case. We still use that language. CDC is still using that language. And I mean, the fact of the matter is we're not doing enough to boost people. So there's about 350,000 people in the state who've received their booster shots. There's about 1 million who are fully vaccinated, right? 2 doses. So there's actually 550,000 who are eligible right now, roughly 550,000 who are eligible who have not received their booster. And then there's a couple 100,000 who haven't had shots at all. What we know is that vaccine passports and vaccine mandates work. So at UHERO, Ruben Juarez and his colleagues at the med school have done studies that show that we see significant increase in vaccine uptake when we have vaccine mandates and vaccine passports. When the Oahu and the Maui vaccine programs went into effect, we saw, if I remember right, it's about a 1.5% increase in the rate of vaccination. So we know those work. We should have those statewide. All the counties should be doing this. I know that's not your Juliana anymore. But the thing that people don't realize is that the current rate of boosting, it's going to take us 5 months. I mean, so there's a lot of people who are going to get sick and get sicker than they would have otherwise if we had just gone forward. And the state could redefine what it means for a state employee to be fully vaccinated, and that would make an enormous difference. So that's my rant for today. So the uncertainty from all this affects the forecast tremendously. And Eugene mentioned that really the only recovery we've seen in tourism has been U.S. visitors. We can't count on that continuing, right? I mean, the reason that the U.S. visitors have been here in such large numbers is largely because they can't go anywhere else, right? Certainly last summer they couldn't go anywhere else. Right now they can't go to Europe. They can still go to Canada, but even that's kind of dicey. And so we really need to have those international visitors back, which again just means controlling what we can control, which is the pandemic in Hawaii. So in what happens is in the forecast, the different scenarios, and we've been doing scenarios for 2 years now, because each time we do a forecast, there's this wide range of uncertainty that comes from Omicron spreading around the world in this case. What does that mean for international travel restrictions? Eugene actually mentioned an uptick in air seas from Canada. But the Canadian government has told its residents that they shouldn't be traveling right now. They haven't changed their quarantine rules yet. But if Omicron gets bad enough, they could change their quarantine rules, and that will completely affect Canadian visitors to the islands. Japan's already changed its quarantine rules, Australia, etc. So that played into our more pessimistic assumptions about how long those travel restrictions go into effect and how long they stay in effect differ across our baseline and our pessimistic. The waning federal dollars, in our forecast, we said it meant a drop in income in 2022. That's a little less clear. We just got an update of the income data from the Bureau of Economic Analysis, just got the third quarter data. And there's a whole bunch of technical reasons that the income data shows a sizable increase over and above certainly what we expected. And I actually dug into the data this morning. And it turns out that the PPP loans are still showing up, even though they were given a long time ago, right? And they were paid out to employees back in 2020 and beginning of 2021. They're still showing up in the accounting. And I think what's going on is that it's showing up in the income statistics when it is written off, essentially, right? Because these are loans that the Bureau of Economic Analysis is treating as income when it's forgiven. So when Treasury forgives the loan, it gets counted in income, even though it was really paid out back in 2020 and 2021. So our income data now and into 2022 is going to be partly overstated what's really happening, and then it's also going to be dragged down by the loss of unemployment benefits and other transfer payments. That's more detail than you ever wanted to know. Labor market shortages and
PPP stuff.
Oh, Build Back Better. So in our optimistic scenario in the report, we included the effects of Build Back Better in the optimistic scenario. Unfortunately, Senator Joe looks like he doesn't want child tax credits. So that's a really unfortunate for Hawaii. Those were a piece of that transfer that was happening during 2021 that really boosted incomes. So all the data on how much people are spending and in 2020 and 2021 is all polluted by these federal transfers. It's all polluted by the fact that our incomes went up in the pandemic, right? And our incomes won't go up in 2022, or not much, without the, you have two choices. You get more people back to work at higher wages, or you get the federal government to come in and drop more money, which is highly unlikely. So quick look at, this data is from, some of it's all from yesterday. So I didn't include today's data for Hawaii because it was skewed by the rain showers. Right? If you look at the case counts today, they were really low, like around 1,000. Right? We've been running well over 2,000, 2,000 and 3,000. But the point is that if you look at UK, which has been one of the examples that has been used a lot because of how rapidly the cases have spread. These are all in per million of population. It's a 7-day moving average, so it's comparable across countries. This is state, this is Big Island. Big Island has been the best performer of the counties recently, but even the Big Island has now surpassed the US as a whole. So Hawaii is way in the lead. I mean, we're not the leader, but we're way out in front in terms of case counts, which just proves that a 2-dose regimen isn't adequate, right? What we care about, we care about the cases, but we also care about the hospitalizations. Unfortunately, it's almost impossible to get hospitalization data in Hawaii. HIEMA publishes it on their website, but it's the only way you can get it is to manually gather it every single day. So I'm using Department of Health and Human Services data. It matches almost exactly with a day or two lag. So that's total hospitalizations measured on the left axis. So back in Delta, we peaked at about 450. Today, we're at about 200. There's new hospitalizations. That's measured on the right axis. So in Delta, we peaked right at about 60. And so that's the flow of people into the hospital, right? And then what matters is how many people are coming in, how long they stay, right? So how severe the disease is. And right now, new hospitalizations are right at 30. So we haven't seen, despite cases going through the roof. So the scale's going. This is September. So here's Delta. Here's Omicron. We simply haven't seen the increase in. If you want to look at what the forecast is going forward, now, so I'm using the CDC's ensemble forecast for new hospitalizations. And the reason I do that is ensemble forecast is an average of 7 or 8 different models from across the country. Universities around the country are forecasting cases, they're forecasting hospitalization and deaths for every state, sometimes even county level data. When you average forecast, if you take Eugene's forecast or DVED's forecast and UHERO's forecast, and you average them together, you're probably going to get a better forecast than if you use either one of our individual forecasts. It would help if you had 4 or 5 other forecasts, because you average out differences of opinion, different models, and we all make mistakes, and we're all wrong, right? You average out those. So that's why we use the CDC. We also have confidence intervals. So this is a new hospitalization. It's the gold line, measured on the right axis. So their forecast, this was from a week ago, it'll update tomorrow, it'll be on our data portal tomorrow morning. And this is the confidence interval, the high end of the confidence interval. So 95% of the time you fall somewhere in those two, inside those bands. Their upper end of the confidence interval, which is where the data is coming in, tells us we're going to get back to Delta levels of new hospitalizations by mid-January. So their baseline forecast doesn't do that. But when they release an update tomorrow, they're going to raise the forecast because the data has been coming in above the baseline forecast. So we're headed for more people in the hospital. And the key, again, is boosting, masking, and maybe some other restrictions as well, not to the extent of shutting things down, I think. You have to play off the costs and benefits of everything. So let's look at the effects of this is Delta, really, on the US economy. So this is real GDP growth. This is our forecast of real GDP growth from third quarter of 2021 and fourth quarter forecast report. So we lowered, actually this is our data now. So this was the forecasting for third quarter of 2021 when we released it in the third quarter of 2021. The data came in much, much weaker. And the vast majority of that is supply chain disruptions, right? It's a combination of people getting sick and plants shutting down, but it's probably half of it is supply chain disruptions. With Omicron, so as we start to adjust these forecasts for our next report, with Omicron, it looks like the bigger impact is going to be labor force disruptions, right? We're seeing that everywhere. Everywhere in Hawaii, it's probably affecting some of our flights, no doubt. And so that could end up being the biggest effect of Omicron because it basically is affecting so many people that you simply can't keep the labor force there. And we're talking about doing that from a reduced labor force already. So some of these graphs look a little bit like the ones that Dr. Tian was showing. One of the differences is anytime we show jobs, we're not showing the same data. We do an estimate of what the revisions are going to be before they happen. So we get preliminary payroll jobs data every month, and then come March of each year, the Bureau of Labor Statistics does a wholesale revision of the data because it's a sample, but they go back and they use the whole population and they come up with the final numbers for payroll jobs. So we estimate what those changes are going to be, and they actually imply a big. You may remember, I think Eugene's number was in the 80s, so we were still down, I think, 85,000 jobs. Our estimate is that number is going to be better because of those revisions. Still, you can see, the job losses were also worse in our estimate from the beginning of the pandemic. That's measured on the right axis. You can't quite see the axis there because it's talking WAM. But that's talking about 140,000 job losses. That's measured on the right axis for Hawaii, 25 million for the US. And the US recovery was much more smooth. You can see the different waves of the pandemic here, right? So you have the shutdown, reopening, second shutdown, right? So this was the summer wave. And then here's winter, we had a small winter wave. This is reopening to safe travels, right? So you have a rapid recovery of jobs, then you have a very small winter wave, then you have the summer tourism boom, and this is Delta. And in the payroll job counts, jobs fell in August, September. They barely moved in October, November. And we've really, that shows you the impact of another wave of the pandemic. What we really need to see happen is to have a consistent recovery, right? Without additional waves every 3 or 4 months that causes a stall in the jobs recovery. So this is the data that Eugene showed for the state, but I'm showing it for the nation. And the national, so if I put shortage in quotations, it's the labor market is highly disrupted right now, right? There's a lot going on. These quits, these aren't people who are quitting their jobs and going home and sitting on the couch and playing computer games, right? Many of these people, they're either staying home because they're sick, or they're taking care of a loved one, or they can't get childcare, or they're searching for a new job, right? They're switching jobs, and it takes time. So that's a lot of this reflects labor market churn, reflects people seeking out better employment, a better match, which generally would be higher wages, better use of their skills, and a more satisfying job. So one of the things that's happening is people want flexibility, right? They want to be able to partially work remotely and not to be forced to go back into a work environment that they don't think is safe. If you look at the hires nationally versus the openings, so that gap And this has not been updated with the November data, which just came out today. But that gap for the nation is 3 times higher than it was back in 2019 when we thought the labor market was tight. In Hawaii, that gap is nowhere near as big as it is for the continent, for the rest of the country. And the reason is we haven't had a sustained recovery, right? So you saw in the payroll jobs numbers, we haven't created the same level of hiring demand because we haven't been able to sustain the recovery. We still do have a shortage in quotation marks. Now, what would normally happen during a shortage? You would pay people more, right? And we are seeing a little bit of that, not as much as you would think. And this again is national data, and I apologize for that, but we don't have this data for Hawaii. This is total compensation, rather. So with wage data, it's polluted by the mix of jobs, right? The total compensation data adjusts for that, and it includes benefits as well. It's not just wages and salaries. And so this nationally, what we're talking about is just barely being above the long-term trend for compensation growth. And yet inflation, as we know, is now well above trend. This is just in the last quarter of 2021, inflation was 3% above trend. So the result is real wages, real compensation is declining. And that's true in many industries. In Hawaii, the places with the biggest shortages, the places that are having the hardest time finding workers, food service, retail, accommodations, have seen the biggest wage increases. And those are really, in the big sectors, those are the only ones that are showing real wage gains. Most other sectors are showing declining real wages. That's one of the reasons why consumers aren't thrilled with the way things are going, right? If you see rising prices, right? So milk's up, gas is up, food across the board, particularly meat, is much more expensive. Basically, everything is more expensive right now, and their income isn't keeping up. And that along with pandemic, some of this is declining confidence associated with changes in the pandemic. What's interesting is that Hawaii's consumer confidence had recovered to pre-pandemic levels. Right? This is Hawaii, this is US, this is University of Michigan survey. This is a survey done by Morning Consult. Almost all this data is on our data portal. And yet Hawaii turned down during the Delta wave and now with the Omicron wave. And that really shouldn't be surprising. And so one of the reasons for looking at this is that it really is, I mean, the questions for these sentiment surveys are asking whether people intend to spend money in the future. Are they confident about their income, their job prospects? Are they going to buy a car? Are they going to buy a washing machine? Things that will drive excise tax, the excise tax base, tax revenues. And I don't see anything to be afraid of in this, but most of what we're seeing in the data suggests that we're sort of dealing with a artificially buoyant economy. And a lot of the things that are buoying it are going away or have already gone away. And so there's good reason for caution. The key thing with inflation, and this is sort of my Fed policy speak, is that what matters is how long it's going to last, and what matters is what people think is going to happen. And so the Fed watches these indicators very closely. This is the University of Michigan survey of 1-year inflation expectations. So rightfully so, that's very elevated, right, at 5%. But the same survey asks, what do you think the inflation rate is going to be for the next 5 years? It's under 3%. That's completely manageable. The Fed's target is 2%. So when they watch that 5-year expectation, what they care about is when it starts to turn up like the past. The gold line is you can calculate these expectations from bond market data, and the 10-year expectation is about 2.5%. So just a little bit above the Fed's target. But they're watching this data, and that's why they've announced that they're going to more rapidly take back some of their stimulus and raise interest rates. So the expectation is that the short-term rate is going to go up probably 75 basis points, so 3/4 of 1 percentage point during 2022. And that's actually essentially what we built into our forecast. That means almost certainly higher mortgage rates, higher long-term bond rates, and we built those into our forecast, and that tempers sort of the outlook for construction and housing as well. A few more slides. I know it's getting dry and I'm not moving around enough. The policy that we built into the forecast for Build Back Better is in our optimistic, but there's just not that much of it. The differences aren't that large. These are all as percentages of GDP, and this is outlays as a percent of GDP, which of course surged during the pandemic, and these are revenues, which went down because the economy was slowing down. What matters is net spending. Right? For the economy, spending is an add-on, right? It boosts demand. Taxing reduces demand. It's a drag. So what matters is the net. And when you do the net, by 2022, 2023, we're going to be back where we were in 2019, which is as expected. But the point is that compared to where we've been over the last 2 years, it's a drag, right? We've been way up here in terms of net spending, and we're taking it away. And when you take it away, the comparison from 2021 to 2022 gets very, very difficult. It's much harder. These are headwinds on the US economy and the Hawaii economy. So we put the infrastructure bill into our baseline forecast. So our expectation is very elevated construction activity for the next 3 to 5 years. It's still not nearly as big as you would believe if you read the newspaper. None of these bills are massive by any. Remember, they're spread out over a decade, right? So when you take the headline number and say, oh, that's massive, but now divide it by 10, and now convert it to a percent of GDP, and it starts to get pretty small. But they matter, and we're going to miss BBB if we don't get it. So another comparison of sort of that headwind and where we've been. This is essentially, actually, if I remember right, Eugene's number here was about 14%, 14.5%, I think, over roughly the same period. This is essentially the growth rate from fourth quarter of 2019. I think he was using monthly data, the third quarter of 2021, and these are payroll jobs. The reason the numbers are different is because we're estimating what the revisions are going to be. So we think the jobs picture is actually going to look better, but GDP through the third quarter lost 6% of output. That primarily reflects the tourism hit. The labor earnings didn't fall at all. So this reflects the changing mix, right? So a lot of the people who lost their jobs were at the lower end of the pay scale, and the people who kept their jobs saw pay increases. And so we had no loss in labor earning over this time period. The total income went up by 4%. So I don't know how that math works. It's because we saw a 33% increase in transfer payments. So before the pandemic, transfer payments totaled maybe $15 billion nominal. So that means Social Security benefits, Medicare, Medicaid, unemployment benefits, everything else. Those are the biggies. During the pandemic, they peaked at 24, 25 billion maybe in Q1, Q2. And now they're headed back towards 15, 16 billion. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security are all going to be higher, right? They're relatively permanently higher because of inflation and more people retire. But this is unemployment benefits, right? It's the plus-up benefits, it's the expanded unemployment benefits, it's the PPP loans, it's those $1,200 checks that people got, it's the payments and transfers to farmers, and it's gone, right? Except some of it is showing up in the income data, as I mentioned earlier, which confused me. So our estimates of the transfer payments from 2022 to 2021 is a 25% drop, which makes it, again, it's just a headwind, right? People are going, so, you know, we talk a lot about what's going on with the disadvantaged and, you know, Alice households and how hard it was during the pandemic. And it was initially. In the beginning of the pandemic, right, we had food insecurity issues and people couldn't get their unemployment benefits and so on. But in the middle of the pandemic, with all the federal money coming, and if you were getting your unemployment benefits, you were almost certainly better off than you were in 2018, 2019. But now that's all going to turn around again because all that federal money's gone. And so I guess my point is that we don't want to lose focus on those families. In fact, we want to recognize that things are getting worse for them now, even worse than they were in 2020, 2021. Another graph that's kind of similar to what Eugene was showing again with our revised data, and you can see, for Kauai, here's the second shutdown of Kauai. You can see the pandemic really clearly, and you can see the Maui and Kauai much worse off than the two islands that have the most diverse economies, right? Big Island and Oahu by far have the most diverse economies for different reasons. But note all of them, with the exception of Kauai, saw a real flattening to basically a stall. Almost no jobs recovery since Delta hit. And if you look at hours worked, it wasn't just the fact that we weren't adding more jobs, people were working fewer hours. So, people in the hotel industry, in the food service industry, were getting their hours cut back because the visitors went away. And they went away even before the governor said, stay away. We were seeing decline in bookings and cancellations as far back as, really it started at the very end of July and accelerated into August. In the very short run, this is the Uhiro Pulse, the blue line, which again completely tracks the pandemic. It's a high frequency weekly, it comes out every single week, and it tracks economic conditions compared to right before the pandemic. So that pulse is telling us we've recovered about 68 to 69% of activity, and it's telling us that green bars are jobs, that this flatness in payroll jobs is likely to continue into December. Right, so the November payroll jobs show almost no growth over October, and the August and September were down. So we basically have been just going sideways since the end of summer. So we saw this great growth in jobs and then complete pause. What really needs to happen is we get past Omicron and we keep the line going up like that for the next year or 2 years. So I talked a lot about the scenarios. When I look at the daily visitor data for November and December, I'm not impressed. Or maybe I should say we were too optimistic. Because when we were building that forecast, we thought the bounce back from Delta was going to be even stronger. The December data looks to me like we probably saw 75% of 2019 levels for December. The good news is spending, as Eugene pointed out, spending has done better than arrivals, and that's actually what we'd like to have happen, right? We just as soon stay at 2018 levels of arrivals, but have 2019 levels of spending and stronger, and that may be possible. But I would say that going forward, our forecast for arrivals is going to be somewhere between that pessimistic and pessimistic and baseline, at least for the first quarter of the year, and that's all about Omicron. And when you convert that into spending in real dollars, that's about $2 billion in spending. It's a lot of money, and so looking at the income scenarios, and I've talked about the fact that 2022 might end up being below 2019. That's what our forecasts say. This is 2022, but the data all got revised, so we may be bolstering that. But all it's going to do is shift this up. We're still going to see a year-to-year decline. It just may not fall back all the way back to 2019 levels. So to leave with some sort of bleak news, actually, Senator Moriwaki said, "Oh, you're here to give us good news this time." I mean, it is good news. We're in a much, much better place than we were a year ago, by far. I mean, if for no other reason, because of vaccinations, right? And we've learned better how to live with the virus. The economy is in a better shape. But when we think of, so we think about recovery, and when do we get back to job numbers? And actually, we don't get back to the same job numbers in this forecast horizon because of labor force and the uncertainty. So we've got scenarios for the labor force. It's the civilian labor force that has gone. It's measured on the left axis. Right? So it's gone from right about 670,000 and it fell to about 635,000. But we're nowhere near where we were pre-pandemic. So I believe that's between 25 and 30,000 people have left the labor force. So when you look at the unemployment rate number coming down, it's not that exciting, right? Because when people leave the labor force, it has the effect of pulling the unemployment rate down for the same number of jobs. And the question is, where are we going to find the workers in the future? Of that 25 or 29,000, I can't remember the exact number, probably 30% of them are retired. Right? So we saw a wave of early retirements. You're 60 years old or 65 years old. You just saw your stock portfolio go up by 20% for 2 years in a row. You have to worry about, going to work and catching COVID. Early retirement looks really appealing. And so we know that we've seen that. The question is, will any of those people come back? And what's going to happen to the working age, the 20 to 45 or 50-year-olds that have left the labor force for a whole variety of reasons. So this is civilian population measured on the right axis. That data is hard to get your head around just because the official statistics haven't been updated. We got the 2020 census, we got the 2021 intercensual estimate, but the data between 2020 and 2010, which hasn't been revised. And so they don't line up. So we do the lining up ourselves. So we create this data that continues to show a drop in population, 0.7% drop in population in 2021, a bigger drop in 2020. Even though the census numbers, right, the 2020 census, everybody was kind of excited because it showed the population was higher than we thought it was. But actually, when you look, so Census publishes two numbers. They published the 2020 census, which is an April count, and in July they have an intercensual estimate, and they showed, I think it was a 10,000 person drop between April and July. So what happened between April and July of 2020? All those people who were living in Hawaii, who didn't have any families here, who lost their jobs working in the restaurant or the bar or the hotel, they went home to the mainland, right? And apparently that continued in 2021. And no, we didn't see a wave of remote workers that completely offset that. So the question is, what are we returning to? Are we returning to a world where the labor force is much, much lower, or are we returning to a world where labor force gets back to where it was? And that matters for the growth of the economy. This is total population, which we have bottoming out. There's no guarantee that's going to happen, right? This is just a forecast. And we've been seeing, and this is a national issue too. Nationally, the data for 2021, I should have looked this up. I don't remember what the number is. It was one of the lowest rates of population growth in decades, if not a generation. It was close to zero. Very low number. Birth rates have been falling ever since the Great Recession. Put all this together, the question is, what are we recovering to? So what did the economy look like before COVID? Well, from 2007 to 2019, that's peak to peak, right? So 2007 was right before the Great Recession. 2019 was right before the pandemic. Notice 2019 growth in real GDP, zero. That whole time period, the compound annual growth rate of real GDP in Hawaii was less than 1%. That's not enough to cover the infrastructure costs that we have to bear for climate change, for a new stadium, a new whatever, and that's what we should be expecting to recover to. And actually, back in 2019, we were trying to decide whether we should forecast that we were in a recession. This was before the pandemic. So what happens is you get recovery. We had 1 year, 2015, with surge in visitors from short-term vacation rentals, with surge in construction activity. That's the only year in that whole decade where we saw growth over 4%. All the other years were 2% or less. So that's what we're recovering to. We're going to have some rapid growth over the next few years, and then it's going to be kind of back to no, I don't want to say back to normal. And there's all the numbers. They're in the report. If you don't read our website regularly, you get the email. So
Do you have any more granular data on the jobs? Because that's kind of where we recover to, because with the pandemic, we've learned that we have remote workplaces. We can use the technology better. Is there a way we can recover to some of the
Yes.
Are you done with your presentation?
I am. Can we turn it off?
Yeah, okay.
Yep.
And then we can have get the house members back on.
Well, they all left.
No.
There we go.
Yeah, okay. Okay, so I guess what we'll try to do is we'll take one question from the Senate and then we'll take one question from the House and we'll go back and forth. So since Sharon already started.
I just wanted to follow up because of the jobs and the hires versus, we're not following up on that. That could give us a new kind of path to recovery.
And it will, right? I mean, the businesses have had to adapt, right? They've had to learn how to do more with less. And that is, Eugene was talking about this in his presentation about the growth and productivity. The growth and productivity is a little hard to measure right now with with income stats because the income data is all polluted. With the GDP stats, it's a little easier. There's always a jump in productivity as you come out of recessions because it always takes longer to bring the jobs back. So whether or not we continue with some of those we will continue with some of those labor saving practices, but not all of them, because some of them impose higher costs than benefits. And we're going to keep them up in a variety of sectors because we simply can't find the workers. So yeah, we can't. So in our forecast, GDP grows much faster than jobs and income do. Not much faster, but it grows faster than jobs and income. So GDP does recover while jobs doesn't necessarily recover.
So
just consistent with what you're.
That we look at should be building on those bases that.
Okay, wait, just one question at a time, because we got lots of members. Okay.
Where are we going to build?
Okay, so I'll defer to Chair Luke if she would like me to acknowledge a House member or.
Yeah, so Chair De La Cruz, go ahead so that we can speed things up. You can go ahead and call in the House members. And so for the House members, if you can do a virtual raising of your hand so that Chair De La Cruz can recognize you. I think we have on cue Representative Martin and Representative Tam. So Chair De La Cruz will call on you. Thank you, Chair De La Cruz.
Okay, Representative Martin.
Thank you. Good morning. I have a question for Dr. Tian. I was interested in the bankruptcy numbers. I understand that they came down because of the subsidies and recovery, but they're actually even lower than before COVID. And I wondered if you thought that people are just not starting businesses. They're not opening restaurants, et cetera, as they might have before the pandemic. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Representative. I think that the number decrease during the pandemic in 2020 and 2021. This mainly is because of the federal assistance. The total money came to the state during 2020 and 2021. So far, as of today, is about $20 billion. So the $20 billion, if you compare with the visitor spending, is about 18 billion. So we lost some visitor spending, and the federal money coming in is about 20 billion. Those help the business to either delay their bankruptcy filing. From the past experience, I think during this pandemic, there are two indicators. It's very different from the normal year. One, I think Carl talked about it a little bit, is the income, personal income. It's supposed to decrease, but this time it's an increase. But we both, I think you hear in the debate, we both forecast that there will be a decrease in the personal income in 2022. But another indicator is the bankruptcy. It's supposed to be increased during the recession year, but it's actually decreased in 2020 and continue in 2021. So I think the 2021 decrease 2020 is mainly the federal assistance. Those money came to the state. I think 2021 is two factors. One is the federal assistance money is still in the play in the economy. It will last for a few years. And secondly is the recovery of the economy, because we see the GDP recovery is about 94% overall for the first 3 quarters. The 5.6% of the economic growth rate is really high. That's the highest since 2006. So those two factors make the bankruptcy. I do feel that the bankruptcy, usually when the economy, we divide it into two periods. One is called the expansion. Now is expansion, and we have a declining and expansion. During this expansion, usually the bankruptcy filing is increase. For example, 2010, it was an increase. The peak was 2010, not 2009. 2009 was the Great Recession. So I do expect that 2022, it might become a little bit normal and maybe have some increase. But since 2022 is a major year with the economic recovery, although we have a lot of uncertainties, but I think 2022 will be a major recovery. It's mainly from the international tourism. So the number of bankruptcy won't be too big.
Thank you.
Senator, can I?
Yeah. Want to add to that?
Because Representative Martin also asked about business starts, and she was asking whether maybe the reason for this was because people weren't starting up new businesses, but the data actually suggests that people are starting up new businesses, and actually some people have suggested that one reason that the labor force hasn't recovered, I don't think this is a great explanation, but it's because people aren't going back to work, but instead they're starting their own businesses. They're self-employed now. So again, it's not a perfect explanation, but if you look in the employment section on our data portal, there's a whole bunch of census data on business starts, and they're actually up quite sharply. So those people who lost their jobs working in a restaurant or wherever have now presumably started pop-up restaurants or delivery services or all kinds of the changes that have been induced by the pandemic.
Thank you.
Okay, we'll go to Senator Ms. Lucha and then Representative Tam.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Bonham, for your presentation. So there are multiple efforts or initiatives right now to develop workforce development, particularly in IT. And I think it makes sense because particularly if the jobs are outside of the state, the people who are employed can stay here and can telecommute and continue to service those organizations. But you were mentioning that the shortage that you're referring to primarily are in retail, more like the lower paid positions, right? So if that continues to be where there's this shortage, what do you think might happen?
Well, so that's not the only place that there are shortages, right? There really are shortages everywhere.
But particularly those, though, right?
Well, those are ones where they shed the most jobs during the downturn, right? And so you imagine that you've let go half of your workforce, and a big chunk of that has moved on to something else, right? They've moved on to different jobs, or they've retired, or they left the state. So it may very well be that the reason that those areas are struggling to find workers is because they were employing people who were more footloose. They weren't, they didn't grow up here. They didn't have families here. They were working in restaurants, waiting tables, whatever, surfing during the day, waiting tables at night, and they left. So I'm not suggesting that they are the primary location of shortages. And really there are shortages everywhere. And the programs that are focused on sort of essentially allowing people, training people, and hooking people up with potential for remote work, right? I mean, that has some promise, but it's in our view, and we were able to hire a new faculty member whose expertise is in regional economic growth and development and innovation. And we've actually been working, and DBED has also been working with the folks who have been trying to bring people here to do remote work. I can't remember the name of the organization off the top of my head, but basically our view is that remote work is going to be a small piece of our economy. It's doable. It's not nearly as big as people have made it out to be. It's quite a bit smaller.
Okay.
Still important. I mean, I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing that.
Do a quick follow-up question.
Quick.
Okay, so I know that at some point there was an exodus of residents who left the state in search of better, greener pastures outside the state. Does it make sense to invite them back here? I don't know exactly what kind of jobs would welcome them, but if we're short on population base, does it make sense to pursue that particular
Sure.
route?
Yeah. I mean, in fact, that may be the sort of lowest hanging fruit, if you will, to bring people back who can do remote work, right? So the thing about remote work is that it's much easier to do once you're established, right? So it's really easy to work with someone over 1,000,000 miles or 1,000 miles or whatever once you've already been working with them for 6 months or a year. And so, Kamaina who have gone and worked in Silicon Valley or in Washington or wherever and have an established job, it's easier for them to come back and maintain that remote connection. So I think it is worthwhile. The thing to keep in mind is that the conditions that cause people to live in Hawaii or to live elsewhere are multifaceted, right? It's overall cost of living, it's cost of housing, cost of childcare, quality of schools, the culture, the beaches, all those things matter. And I would argue that the reason we've seen a decline in population in Hawaii since 2016 in the civilian population has more to do with the booming U.S. economy over that time period. The fact that, we often talk about how low our unemployment rate was. Well, many states in the country also were hitting record low unemployment rates from 2017 to 2019, when we were seeing a decline in population. And so, unless we're going to suddenly become all job opportunities to everybody, we're not going to completely stop that. And it's frankly, it's a good thing. The movement back and forth is a good thing. We just need to create the conditions here that are conducive for people to stay.
Good point. Thank you.
Representative Tan.
Thank you so much. My question is for Dr. Tian. Thank you for being here today. You mentioned that the job opening data is not available for Hawaii yet. My questions are, will that data be available? Do you have any idea what it looks like? And I'm assuming that job openings are high in Hawaii. So do you see businesses increasing wages to attract applications for those job openings?
Yes. Yeah, the November data for the nation just came out this morning. For the state, I think it will take a few days to become available for November. But the October number did show that we have more openings than the hires. The gap is about 18,000. I think this is a mismatch because I think the jobs shortage is all over, like Carl said. But I think the most job opening is in the professional services, in the business administration, business services. So I think we lost jobs in the tourism sector. For example, the tourism sector, we still have about 40,000 job loss, but those people, they need training in order to take jobs in the professional services and the business administration. So there is some mismatch. And also, I agree with Carl that although the number for population is not a final, but have a feeling that we may have lost a population in 2020 and 2021. So although our population current estimate is our population decreased by 0.7% in 2021, but when we look at the labor force compared in November compared with January, we lost over 9,000 people in the labor force. So where these people go if they are not looking for jobs? I think one is they may move out of state, they may quit, not even working, not looking for jobs, they may retire. So those are the possibilities. So I think in terms of the job shortage, we will continue. We'll have more job openings. I think the October was the peak level. I think there will be, I expect there will be more openings because of the economic recovery, but because we lost the population, we lost the labor force, and because of the mismatch of the occupation, we may continue to have a job shortage. I think in terms of remote work, we just DBED just concluded a survey of remote work survey by the end of last year, December 31st. We are now in the process of writing the report. I think in a month or two, we will report what are the status of the remote work. So I think the remote work will be a new thing in the economy.
Okay, I'll take someone from the Senate. Does anyone have a question? Okay, oh, Senator Favela.
Sorry, I'm not sure the director is too, but as far as infrastructure, the federal government is determined through infrastructure spending to create construction jobs, to increase productivity, and enable businesses to operate efficiently. As the infrastructure spending in Hawaii result in a significant economic growth?
Yes.
You know how much?
I can't tell you right off the top of my head. I know that it's in our forecast, and I'm sure it's in DBED's forecast as well. And as Dr. Tian mentioned, construction has been the sort of the bright spot in the economy. Not having that actually may partly explain why we didn't see an increase in bankruptcies like we did back in the Great Recession when we lost so many construction firms and construction jobs. But the one caveat to that is that boosting construction spending when construction employment is getting close to its previous peak is going to be challenging, right? We're going to have the contractors and are going to have a hard time finding workers, and this is going to happen at the time when every place else in the country is also trying to boost infrastructure spending, right? They're trying to fix their roads and do the infrastructure investment that they should have done 20 years ago. And so we face some challenges in terms of construction employment. And this is actually an opportunity for like the community colleges. We have training programs to get people into the construction trades. And we've got people who don't want to work in the job they used to be in, right? Eugene was talking about the mismatch where someone wants to be in a different area than where they used to work or where the jobs are open. And so I think there's some opportunities there.
Okay. Is there someone from the House that has a question? I can't see. Okay, if not, someone from the Senate?
I have a question.
Oh, excuse me. Wait.
No, I think Representative Tam had another question, but does anybody else have a question first time? If not, I think Representative Tam has a follow-up.
Hi, thank you. Not really a follow-up, but Dr. Tian again. My question is about real estate transactions. You said that real estate transactions are up amongst local buyers compared to years ago. do you have any statistics on how many of them are first-time home buyers instead of buyers seeking investment properties or using them for vacation rentals?
Yeah, we don't have those data on the how many of these are first-time buyers. So this is the data is from the land court, and they just reported this data is not perfect. It's only for the ones they provide address of their, for their the real property tax note will be sent to. So, for example, if a home was registered to Hawaii business or to a lawyer or real estate agent in the state, and that number may be counted as a Hawaii residents. But to be consistent for the last, we have data since 2008, to be consistent with this kind of data, we do see that the increase in the local residents purchase is significant, especially for Maui and Kauai.
Thank you. How many of them are is there a way to find out how many of them are owner occupied?
Yeah, we didn't have that. There is a survey by the HFDC, and they had a housing study released in the last 2 years. It has some data there, and I will dig into that, and I will report to you afterward.
Thank you, Dr. Tian.
You wanted to say something?
Well, so the data that Dr. Chow was looking at, he was comparing 2010 and most recent year. I think it was the first 3 quarters of 2021. I believe that's what he was looking at. And so I know it's hard to make these comparisons. He was looking at the proportion of homes that were bought by locals and was finding that the proportion of homes in 2021 bought by locals was higher than it was in 2010. But 2010 was near the trough of the decline in home building and home purchasing after the Great Recession. And so that it's really, I guess I wouldn't be inclined to make that particular comparison. And then the other thing that's going on is we still have, Dr. Tian can correct me if I'm wrong, but the international buyer is really missing from the Hawaii market right now. Has really pretty much disappeared.
It's very small for international purchases. For example, for the island of Oahu, in 2021, there was only 30. But usually the purchase from international, we have 500 per year from Canadians, about 500 from Japanese. But 2021 was very small sample.
I guess I would be inclined to look at 2019 rather than 2020 is all I'm saying. I don't know if the same story would hold.
Senator Inouye?
Yes, Carl, I've noticed that the projection for the visitor arrivals and more closely, if you look at 2023, you're almost close to the arrivals of 2019. But have you taken into consideration the new tax increases that the counties raised in the TAT? Or would there be an impact?
So we did not try to introduce an effect from the TAT changes for a variety of reasons. One, hotel room rates have risen at such an incredibly high rate, particularly on Maui, that it swamps the 3% tax increases. It's actually pretty astounding how high, how much hotel room rates have climbed. And Eugene showed the data on the hotel tax base, right? So even though we have many fewer visitors, the hotel tax base has completely recovered, and that's because of rising room rates. And so the short answer is no, we didn't. What we are more focused on is the effects of restrictions on capacity, right, on TVRs in particular. So while we may have visitor arrivals, you must be looking out several years to see a visitor arrival number that it's close to 2019. the mix of that is changing. So it's, right, so it will be many fewer visitors on Oahu because we're essentially assuming that the city is going to enforce what is effectively a ban on TVRs outside of resort zones. And so much of that growth will happen on the other islands. That there are still also undergoing efforts to restrict, but not nearly as, a larger share of their room stock is on Oahu in terms of the change.
Well, hopefully the cruise lines, I understand they're already going to start up this month into Hawaii waters. So hopefully that would probably make up for the expenditure part.
Yeah, I guess, so, our early, it's been many, many years, I wrote a paper with Jim Mack, actually a couple of papers, one with Jim Mack and Ed Fujii and others, and one with Byron Gangnis that studied the impacts of the initial imposition of the hotel room tax. And we did not find evidence that it was large enough to cause a change in visitor behavior, right? So visitors didn't stay away because of it. But what matters is what's happening around the globe and where our position is, relative to our competitors in terms of pricing. And like I said, we've already raised our hotel room rates by double-digit rates plus some.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
House members? Okay, anyone from the Senate? Senator Misalucha? Oh, sorry. Senator Taniguchi.
Okay.
Oh, thank you. Just a follow up to Representative Tam's question about real estate. Do we collect data on who the sellers are for real property?
Yeah, our data doesn't have that who are the sellers. So the data is only reporting the buyers, police operations.
Right. Yeah. So Bureau of Conveyances would have that for, I think, only for, I'm not sure if they would have it for all transactions. They definitely have it for foreign transactions.
Okay. So we don't collect that. We don't have that at this point. Yeah.
Bureau of Conveyances has a wealth of data that they make almost impossible for anybody to get.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone from the House? Is that Representative Kobayashi?
Omicron will, I think, have a significant impact on economic forecast. Do you agree?
Absolutely.
It seems that we currently do not have data to predict where Omicron will go in the next, say, 2 to 10 months. And so I'm wondering if we will have data, Omicron-related trend data, by March when the Council on Revenue meets again.
So, I mean, my guess, because you're right, we don't have the capability, even with all the data and all the effort that's going on around the world, no one is suggesting that they can really predict what COVID will look like in March. Actually,
the point here is that Council on Revenues will meet next week?
This week. We meet on Thursday, and then we'll meet again in March.
Yeah, so this week you won't have data that will be able to predict where Omicron will go months from now. But the question is, will you have that Omicron-related data to help you guide predictions in March?
Well, so we will know the current state of the pandemic in March. My guess is that by March, we won't be talking much about Omicron anymore. It'll be sort of like Delta, and it'll be in the rearview mirror. And the real question will be whether there will be another variant that we have to worry about. And if if you just look at history, I think there's reason to think that we might have another variant, but none of us know at this point whether, and in March, I just don't know. I can't tell you whether we'll have a clearer picture in March, or will it be even more cloudy? I don't know.
Yeah, and even if there is another variant, if it's not severe, or if it's,
we just don't
at that
know.
point it's just a common cold type of reaction.
Hopefully.
Okay, Senator Misalucha.
Okay, so this is for both of you folks, Dr. Bonham and Dr. Tien. So we constantly talk about diversifying the economy, and the COVID experience has fleshed out how vulnerable we are because of our dependence on tourism. So we certainly can't throw out the baby with the bathwater, so I'm not suggesting abandoning tourism altogether. But they said crisis normally breeds opportunity or gives way to opportunity. So in your estimation, have you seen opportunities for us where we can diversify as a result of our COVID experience?
That's a good question. Unless Eugene wants to go first. So I think there are opportunities. There always were opportunities. Some of them have changed a little bit. We've talked about the remote work, I mentioned earlier the surge in business starts. So really the opportunities are discovered by the entrepreneurs, not by the economists at the university. But we have started a research agenda that is focused on ways to diversify Hawaii's economy. So during the pandemic, we were fortunate enough to have a tremendous amount of financial support from the community that allowed us to hire new faculty members in the middle of a hiring freeze, because we were able to bring in private money to pay for those faculty salaries. And we hired a new faculty member, Dr. Stephen Bond-Smith, whose expertise is in diversifying economies, economic growth, and his focus has always been on small regional economies like Hawaii. He did research on New Zealand and Western Australia. And when you look at small, and he wrote actually as part of his job application, he wrote a piece titled Location, 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 a unique strategy or something for diversifying Hawaii's economy. It's on our website. And the thing about small economies is they tend to be highly concentrated and in things that they're really good at, like tourism. And you can't, as you said, you can't throw out the baby with the bathwater. So what his research is working on is really looking at the existing clusters of industries in the state and asking where would you expect to see stronger economic activity? So for example, we have a strong cluster in insurance that most people aren't aware of. Part of that's because of Hawaii's laws probably about captured insurance and other areas. But so we have a strong traded cluster in insurance. So what else would you normally expect to see associated with an economy that had that kind of? We also obviously have some strong R&D clusters around astronomy, around ocean sciences. What else would you expect to see? And then once you've identified what areas you would expect to see because you've seen it in the rest of the world, then the question is, why don't we have it in Hawaii? What is it that's preventing that? So the research agenda is really about trying to identify areas that you might expect more growth and then go to the community, maybe through the SEDS process or community engagement, and find out what it is that's keeping us from growing in that area. Is it regulatory? Is it the lack of infrastructure? What kinds of small changes in policy or in financing could help?
Leadership. Silos in government.
Sure.
I'm not going to disagree with you.
Okay. Anyway, Representative Tam.
Thank you, Chair. My question is for Dr. Bonham. This is more like hypothetical, but do you think that the Navy's mishandling of Red Hill would hurt our economy? And if, what do you think the effects will be for our economy based on their mishandling?
Wow. The effects are potentially large. You know, as you said, it's a hypothetical. It depends on where we go from here. And, you know, the worst case scenario of the loss of those water resources for an extended period of time has very potentially large repercussions for our economy. If the boil water supply were to have to develop new resources, that will take 5, 10, however many years. And in the meantime, so you can imagine a situation where you couldn't get a hookup for a new home because the water resources weren't there. And think about what it would look like in a world where you can't get new water hookups for housing that's being built. And that's just one example. So I'm not suggesting that that's what's going to happen. And so the best case scenario is no leaks, no further leaks, no further contamination, and presumably that would fall under the category of the fuel moves, and we continue with the water resources that we have. So in that case, you could actually imagine a positive impact on the economy because of all the work that would go into establishing new facilities to hold the fuel, and the federal money that would come in to do that. So the range of possibilities is enormous.
Oh, thank you. You know, I didn't even think about that. What I was thinking about is like, it could possibly even hurt our tourism sector. I don't know how many visitors would want to visit Hawaii if they know that there's potential jet fuel in their water. Do you think I'm correct in my assessment?
Well, that's tough. I mean, there's a heck of a lot of visitors who don't seem to mind coming when we've got COVID all over the place. So it's
fair enough.
I mean, look, if our, so imagine sort of worst case scenario where we just don't have the water resources and visitors are told they can't take a shower for 3 days. So then, yeah, that would affect visitor levels, I suspect. Of course, they can always get in the ocean. I really don't know. That's
yeah, and it would be isolated to Oahu.
Yes.
Thank you, Doctor.
Okay, any last question for someone from the Senate? If not, any last question from someone from the House? Okay, if not, this info briefing is adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you. What time is our next one? 2:30. 10 minutes.